Hello, hello, and the topic of today is experiments, or more correctly, what happens when we don't do experiments. So, like many things in my life, this is a topic that I got exposed to when I was a burn patient in the burn department. And at that time, they had this idea of pressure bandages. And what are pressure bandages? These are basically garments that cover every place that has a scar. So in my case, because so much of my body was covered, they created a head cover for me that had holes for my eyes, mouth, nostrils, and ears. I had the shirt, long sleeved, I had 2 gloves, and I also had something on the bottom of my body. I was fully clothed like a version of Spider-Man. Only my pressure bandages were brown and they were tough. And they were supposed to be a little tough because the theory was that they were pressing and rubbing against the burned skin and therefore softening it. Anyway, it was a real torture to put on. In fact, sometimes when I would put it on, it would tear my skin. It was so tough to put on, and then it was very hot and itchy, and I would move like this. You know, Spider-Man really moves freely. I was like within that. Anyway, it was very, very tough. And I asked the doctors, what's the evidence that this is in fact working? And they showed me a paper, but it wasn't such a good paper. Anyway, there was not much evidence. And I was supposedly going through this incredible torture for something that didn't have much evidence. Well, it just so happened that the top of my thighs don't have burns. This is a place that they used to take skin from me and put on the rest of my body. This was like the growing grounds for skin. They would take something that looked like a cheese slicer and they would slice a little bit of skin from the top of my thighs when I was asleep, of course, anesthetized, and then they would put it on parts of my body and every 2 weeks keep on doing the same thing. Anyway, I knew that the top of my thigh was a place to grow skin, and this was already when I didn't have any open scars. It was all closed, mostly with this donated skin, and I was with these pressure bandages. I said, look, how do you know that this is working? I said, why don't you take an iron and time it so we know the temperature and we know the duration, and make 1 burn on my right thigh and 1 burn on my left thigh and make them sure they're exactly the same. And let's see, we'll have 2 identical burns on the same person, and I'll put these pressure bandages on one leg and not on the other leg. We'll make a hole so it's not on the other leg, and let's see if this is working. And I was serious offering this because it was such a painful process, and I thought about me and all the other patients who are going through this. Anyway, they checked and they said they can't do this experiment on me. It's not ethical. And of course, when I left the hospital, I became enamored with experiments, and I started loving experiment as the way to really find out what's going on. And here is the whole point of this video is I understand the ethical challenges of doing an experiment like the one I proposed, even though it was in my body and I volunteered and so on. I also think there's a lot of ethical problems not doing these experiments. And you know, often when we propose an experiment and we say, oh, this is not an ethical experiment, is it also ethical not to do the experiment? Here we have a methodology that is untested. We don't know whether it's working or not working. We just know that doctors like the theory and they prescribe it and people go through it. Is that ethical? Anyway, I think that me and most patients would be willing to endure more experiments. First of all, it's because of the theory of car scratch. You know, when you have a new car, the first scratch feels really terrible. After that, scratches don't bother you so much. Well, people like me, we have lots of scratches. Accepting another one is not a big deal, but that's just a small part of the story. The real part of the story is, I think, that people who go through the medical system understand how much the medical system needs to be improved. And I think I'm talking beyond, in the name of other people who did not give me that power, but I suspect that we are willing to do all kinds of experiments because we understand how important it is to know compared to not know, and we understand how much lack of knowledge there is. So that's the first point. And then the second point is that, yes, when we think about changing school systems or whatever it is, we think about the ethics of the change, but we rarely think about the ethics of keep on doing what we're doing. How ethical is it, for example, to keep on treating kids to the education system as it is? Not thoroughly tested, not clear it's effective. Is this ethical? Not so sure. How ethical is it to get people to live through the current healthcare system? Lots of things we haven't tested. Anyway, so two thoughts. One is, I think people who have been through the system are willing to do lots of experiments on ourselves. Help science, not just when we die, but when we're alive. And then the second thing is that I think we need to push things more, because keeping things as they are might seem ethical, but I don't think it is. Okay, thought for the day. Bye.